On May 24, 2013, law enforcement agencies across 17 countries executed one of the most coordinated financial takedowns in Internet history. U.S. federal agents seized servers, Costa Rican police raided offices, and in Madrid, a man named Arthur Budovsky was arrested at an airport mid-flight. The charges operating a $6 billion money laundering empire. It was the largest digital currency money laundering operation ever prosecuted. Over 1 million transactions processed every single day. Customers in more than 180 countries. And a platform so trusted by the criminal underworld that it became the de facto reserve currency of the dark web, years before Bitcoin existed. But to understand how a man with no banking license, no physical currency, and no regulatory oversight moved $6 billion for the world's most dangerous criminals, you need to see how he built it. From the ground up, Arthur Budovsky was born in Soviet Ukraine in 1978. By his mid-20s, he had emigrated to the United States and settled in New York. He was not a banker. He was not a tech visionary. He was a man who understood one thing with absolute clarity. The internet had created a massive demand for anonymous money movement, and nobody was supplying it legally. The early 2000s internet was an economic frontier. Online gambling, adult content, fraud rings, and gray market merchants all had the same problem. How do you move money across borders without banks asking questions? Credit cards had chargebacks. Wire transfers had paper trails. PayPal had restrictions. There was a gap in the market, and Budovsky saw it. In 2001, Budovsky co-founded a service called Gold Age, one of the first digital currency exchangers operating in the United States. It converted cash into e-gold, a digital currency backed by physical gold, allowing users to move value online without a bank. It was barely regulated. It was exactly what the criminal internet needed, and it was Budovsky's first proof of concept. By 2006, U.S. authorities had caught up. Budovsky and his partner Vladimir Katz were indicted in New York on charges of operating an unlicensed money transmission business. The charge carried a maximum of 5 years in prison. But what the prosecutors didn't realize was that Budovsky had already been planning his exit, and his next move would be far more sophisticated. In 2006, while still awaiting sentencing, Budovsky made a calculated decision. He renounced his American citizenship, relocated to Costa Rica, and began building something new. Something with no American jurisdiction, something he could run from outside the reach of U.S. law. He called it Liberty Reserve. Liberty Reserve launched in 2006 with a deceptively simple premise. Users could open an account with any name, real or fictional. The platform required only an email address and a date of birth. No identity verification, no bank linkage, no government ID. The account could be named John Doe or Mickey Mouse, and Liberty Reserve would not ask a single question. The currency itself was called Liberty Reserve Dollars, or LR. One LR was nominally worth $1 US, but LR was not real money. It had no legal backing, no regulatory oversight, and no redemption guarantee. It was a private digital token, and that distinction was the foundation of the entire system. Here is how the system worked in 4 steps. Step 1. A user deposits real money, cash, wire transfer, or other digital currency into a third-party exchanger. Step 2. The exchanger converts that money into LR tokens and credits them to the user's Liberty Reserve account. Step 3. The user transfers LR to any other account on the platform, instantly, globally, anonymously. Step 4. The recipient exchanges LR back into real currency through another exchanger. At no point in that transaction did a bank know what happened. There was no wire transfer record, no credit card statement, no SWIFT message. The money entered as cash, became invisible inside the LR system, and exited as cash on the other side. The paper trail didn't just disappear, it was never created. But the real genius wasn't in the anonymity. It was in what Budovsky built around it. He knew the system would attract criminals. He designed it knowing that. The question was, how do you make criminal money movement feel like a legitimate financial service? The answer was branding. Liberty Reserve had a polished website, formal terms of service, and customer support. It even had a stated anti-money laundering policy. On paper. In practice, that policy was never enforced. When regulators or law enforcement sent compliance requests, Liberty Reserve simply ignored them. They had no obligation to respond. They were incorporated in Costa Rica, operating outside U.S. jurisdiction, and Costa Rica had no equivalent of the Bank Secrecy Act. The exchanger network was where the real ingenuity lived. Liberty Reserve itself never touched real money directly. Instead, it relied on a global network of independent third-party exchangers, hundreds of them, scattered across the world, who acted as the on-ramps and off-ramps for cash. This layer of separation was deliberate. It gave Liberty Reserve plausible deniability. These exchangers operated outside any formal financial system. Many were based in countries with minimal AML enforcement: Russia, Malaysia, Nigeria, Vietnam. A user in Moscow could walk into what looked like a small currency exchange shop, hand over rubles, and receive LR tokens within minutes. No ID required at many of these locations. No record kept. Liberty Reserve charged a 1% transaction fee plus a 25-cent privacy fee, an optional charge that, in practice, everyone paid because it obscured the transaction details even further. That privacy fee was not optional for serious users. It was the cost of invisibility, and at 1 million transactions per day, even small fees generated enormous revenue. And this is where the client list becomes staggering. Court documents later revealed that Liberty Reserve's customers included virtually every major category of cybercriminal operating between 2006 and 2013. Credit card fraud rings, identity theft marketplaces, ransomware operators, drug trafficking networks, child exploitation networks, Ponzi scheme operators, hackers selling stolen data by the gigabyte. But what they didn't realize was that this diversity of criminal clientele was itself creating a vulnerability. Every type of criminal who used Liberty Reserve left a slightly different trace in different law enforcement databases across different countries. The system's breadth was also its exposure. A dozen independent investigations were quietly converging on the same address in San Jose. By 2010, Liberty Reserve had processed more than 12 million transactions, totaling over $1 billion. By 2012, that figure had grown to $6 billion. The platform had become, in the words of the Department of Justice, a bank of choice for the criminal underworld. At its peak, it had over 5 million user accounts. 5 million accounts. To put that in context, in 2013, that made Liberty Reserve larger than many legitimate online banks in terms of registered users. The platform served customers in every country on Earth except North Korea and Iran, not for moral reasons, but because those jurisdictions were so sanctioned that even Liberty Reserve considered them too risky. The revenue model was startlingly simple: 1% of every transaction plus the privacy fee. On $6 billion processed, that translates to roughly $60 million in direct fees for the platform itself, money that was then laundered through shell companies Budovsky controlled in Costa Rica, Cyprus, and Hong Kong. But that was only the beginning of what he accumulated. Budovsky lived modestly in San Jose by design. He understood that visible wealth attracted attention. His real assets were hidden inside a web of shell companies. Liberty Reserve's Costa Rican operation employed around 15 staff members, a tiny workforce for a platform processing 1 million transactions daily. The technological infrastructure was the workforce. The platform itself ran on automated software that required minimal human oversight. Transactions were instant, irreversible, and required no human approval. There was no fraud department because there was no concept of fraud. if you had LR in your account, you could send it anywhere. This was not a bug. It was the product. There was one detail that nobody outside the investigation fully appreciated at the time. Liberty Reserve had essentially invented what cryptocurrency would later formalize: pseudonymous accounts, peer-to-peer transfers, irreversible transactions, no central bank, programmable fees. The architecture of Bitcoin, launched just 2 years after Liberty Reserve, mirrored the same principles, though for very different stated purposes. But no system is perfect, and Liberty Reserve had 3 structural weaknesses that were slowly being exploited by investigators who had spent years following the money. The first weakness was the exchanger network. Every exchanger was a human being, and human beings could be flipped. Starting around 2010, the U.S. Secret Service and the Southern District of New York began a joint investigation called Operation Casablanca, a coordinated effort to map the entire Liberty Reserve ecosystem. Undercover agents created accounts on the platform and used it to conduct mock drug money transactions, building a legal record of how the system operated from the inside. The second weakness was Budovsky himself. Despite living in Costa Rica, he had made a critical error. He had applied for Costa Rican citizenship using fraudulent documents. That application created a paper trail in Costa Rican government records, and it gave prosecutors a legal hook they hadn't expected. A man who had fled U.S. jurisdiction had voluntarily created a new jurisdiction problem for himself. The third and most devastating weakness was Costa Rica itself. By 2012, Costa Rican financial authorities had grown alarmed by Liberty Reserve's scale. They began cooperating with U.S. financial intelligence units. Costa Rican regulators officially declared Liberty Reserve an unregistered financial institution in September 2011, making its operations illegal under local law. Budovsky had built his safe harbor on soil that was shifting under his feet. Budovsky's response to the Costa Rican shutdown order was to move the servers. He distributed Liberty Reserve's infrastructure across multiple countries simultaneously, servers in Ukraine, Latvia, Malaysia, and China. He believed that by fragmenting the technical infrastructure across enough jurisdictions, no single country could take down the whole system. What happened next would prove him catastrophically wrong. In 2013, U.S. prosecutors made a legal argument that had never been tested at this scale. Liberty Reserve was subject to U.S. jurisdiction not because it was located in the United States, but because it processed transactions in U.S. dollars and served U.S. customers. This was a jurisdictional theory that, if upheld, could reach any financial platform anywhere on Earth that touched American money or American users. On May 24, 2013, the indictment was unsealed and simultaneous action began across the world. In Spain, Budovsky was arrested at Madrid Barajas Airport while transiting through. He had not been aware that Spain had issued a provisional arrest warrant at U.S. request. He was not carrying cash. He was not visibly armed. He stepped off a flight and walked directly into the hands of Spanish National Police. Simultaneously, the Department of Justice obtained a court order requiring ICANN, the organization that controls internet domain names, to seize the Liberty Reserve domain. Within hours, millions of users worldwide who tried to log in saw only a seizure notice. The platform that had processed 1 million transactions per day went dark in an afternoon. The seizure was coordinated across 17 countries. Servers in Latvia and Ukraine were physically confiscated. Exchanger accounts in Malaysia and Australia were frozen. 14 exchanger operators were arrested in different jurisdictions on the same day. The global simultaneity of the action was itself a message. No platform, no matter how distributed, could outrun a coordinated international legal effort. The 5 million users who had LR tokens in their accounts at the moment of seizure lost everything. The digital currency was worthless the instant the platform went offline. There was no bank insurance, no government guarantee, no recovery mechanism. billions of dollars in criminal proceeds, and some legitimate user funds simply ceased to exist. Arthur Budovsky fought extradition from Spain for nearly 2 years. In January 2016, he finally entered a guilty plea in Manhattan federal court to charges of conspiracy to commit money laundering. He was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison. At sentencing, the judge noted that Liberty Reserve had processed more illicit funds than any financial platform in history at that point. His co-founder, Vladimir Katz, had already pleaded guilty and cooperated with prosecutors. Several of the major exchanger operators received sentences ranging from 2 to 10 years. The infrastructure, the servers, the domain, the financial accounts was permanently liquidated, but the criminal networks that had depended on Liberty Reserve didn't disappear. They migrated. Within months of Liberty Reserve shutdown, the dark web financial ecosystem shifted to Bitcoin and successor platforms like Bitcoin Fog. The criminal demand that Liberty Reserve had served did not end. It simply moved to a system with even stronger cryptographic anonymity. The Liberty Reserve prosecution had removed one platform. It had not solved the underlying architecture problem it represented. The Liberty Reserve case permanently changed how the U.S. government approached digital financial platforms. The jurisdictional theory used to prosecute Budovsky, that touching U.S. dollars or U.S. users created U.S. jurisdiction, became the legal template for dozens of subsequent cryptocurrency enforcement actions, from BTC to Tornado Cash to Binance. Every major digital currency prosecution since 2013 has cited U.S. v. Liberty Reserve. Arthur Budovsky is currently serving his sentence at a federal facility. He built a system that processed $6 billion using a currency he invented in a country he fled to for clients he never met. He exploited every gap between the internet's borderless architecture and the nation-state-bound nature of financial regulation. And for 7 years, it worked. The lesson of Liberty Reserve isn't just about crime. It's about what happens when regulation fails to keep pace with technology and who fills that gap.